what I also enjoy is that the show is setting our characters up to make mistakes too.
Yes.
Um, I like the position that Viserys puts himself in, naming Rhaenyra the heir, now having a male son, which is going to set up a conflict which we know he's not going to act on, but he's also self-aware of that conflict. He speaks to Rhaenyra at the end of the episode and says, "You must marry." He says, "Strengthen your own claim, shore up your succession, multiply."
Yeah.
So, like, Viserys is aware that his decisions are going to lead to people questioning Rhaenyra's claim. So he's urging her, because he loves her, he's urging her to strengthen her claim and to
Well,
shore up her succession. He wouldn't be doing that if he didn't already know that he's causing problems with her for her with his decisions.
because he knows that if he were to die today, that there's a decent chance that when Rhaenyra goes to take the crown, she will have unprecedented challenges to that because people might say, "Well, hold on, why should she get the crown? She doesn't even have an heir of her own, and she's young. Like, is she not going to, you know, have kid like are we still gonna bounce around between brothers and cousins and everything? Like, why not get somebody who has a son already, who, we don't have to worry about who will be the heir for a while because it'll be a parent."
He says to her in at the end of the episode, "Rhaenyra, I wavered at one point, but I swear to you on your mother's memory that you will not be supplanted." That is a promise that he cannot keep. Like,
Yeah.
though he may not supplant her, like, the wording of that, "I swear to you on your mother's memory that you will not be supplanted," he's not necessarily promising that he won't supplant her. He's saying that she won't be supplanted at all. Absolutely not a promise that he can keep.
What's jarring for me is that just 2 episodes ago, King Viserys was dead set on birthing a male child so that he would have a very uniform successor, a very expected successor. But we've gotten to the point now where he's come to the realization himself that Rhaenyra is fit to be queen, despite the fact that he now has a son who he so desperately tried to have a couple episodes ago, who he was obviously yearning for in the last episode. And so the one thing that bothers me about that, and it sounds, okay, first of all, I really like this episode. I was lukewarm on it. I shouldn't say I really liked it. I liked it. I probably didn't like it as much as the last episode, but what's jarring to me is that, you know, that's a very significant change in tone from what he was, what his rhetoric was before. And I'm gonna take a drink every time I mention Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, but it's kind of important to mention here because in Breaking Bad, there's like things happen to Walt and Jesse that change the way they operate, especially Walter. And Walter will feel one way in season one and be dead set on that, and then do a total 180 by season four because of the circumstances that have happened. And so, 'cause it's very important to recall that when you're watching, because you're like, a few seasons ago, he was the complete opposite. He had a totally opposite stance on this, but we've seen over the course of several seasons, the circumstances around him change that would then influence his change of mind.
Well,
In this show,
instead of a course of a couple seasons, we're getting a course of a couple episodes because of the time jumps.
yeah, and I'm not really sure why. Like, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm just not really sure why he is all of a sudden so smitten about Rhaenyra being, the de facto, because he makes it clear that he really does want her to be the de facto successor to himself, which is interesting to me because that means that she's, earning his respect. And I think he's sort of starting to shut out all of the, you know, politics and influence around him in favor of his daughter, who he knows and trusts.
So here's my perspective on it. I know from things that Viserys has done in the show, he loves Rhaenyra. Like, that is the one thing that I can say about him that's redeeming. I think he truly does love his daughter, and he put himself in this position, like, so he named Ray, I'm just gonna call her Ray sometimes. He named Ray his heir to protect the realm from Daemon. He says it himself. and he never he says again, like, he never imagined that he would remarry. So, like, he knows that he set Ray's hopes up to rule, and now the kingdom expects him to dash those hopes by naming Aegon his heir. And he also knows, mind you, that if he doesn't act, Aegon will grow up bitter towards Ray because he's going to know about the power that he could be holding, and Aegon is going to have whispers in his ears about
Right.
politics too.
Because not only is he, would be rightful heir, but also he has his grandfather who's going to be there, Otto Hightower, telling
Right,
him about how he should be the heir. And we know how much Otto wants to have a direct line to the throne because he suggested this episode. Um, uh, Presumably, he's realized by now that Viserys is intent on keeping Rhaenyra as the heir.
right.
He suggests that they marry the Rhaenyra with the
Aegon.
two-year-old Aegon.
Yeah.
That's so screwed up, but it's obviously that's because if he knows that Rhaenyra is set to become queen once Viserys dies, he'll at least have, his grandson be king.
King. Yeah, and he's
Um,
so, like, that's another example of the High Towers just figuring out ways to align their intentions with the intentions of the realm. You know what I mean? Like, say what you will about Otto Hightower, but he's really good at aligning what he wants with what's best for the world too.
well, I think part of it is that in some ways, every character we see yearning for the throne at least has convictions about what they want to accomplish. Viserys is so indecisive about everything that he wants, and we see it reflected so much in this episode, to the point where it's almost frustrating as the audience member. It's a good thing to be frustrated, by the way, as an audience member, if you're watching a character who is intently frustrating. He's such a weak king that he can't even make decisions just for the good of the kingdom. He has like conversation with Alicent, remember, where he's talking about no matter what I do, if I do something to please someone else, it you know angers another, it takes Alicent, who's what 17 at this point, to tell him what about what's good for the king or the realm. Like it doesn't matter who you're going to piss off. If you think something is right to do, you should do it.
Right. Viserys is too focused on trying to please everybody. And knowing Viserys, going back to what he is setting up by choosing to keep Rey as his heir, which I'm not saying is the right or wrong decision, but knowing Viserys, he will choose inaction and allow things to play out as they will. He's going to allow Aegon to grow up, and he's going to allow Aegon to get those whispers in his ear about who he can be. And I think that that's the conflict that they're setting up towards is Aegon versus Rhaenyra. Um, that's going to be the war that we watch play out.
I agree. I think that will be very interesting, depending on how it's set up with whenever time jumps they do and everything. Aegon's 2 right now, I believe, in the show,
Right.
which they make very clear at the
Yeah. Well,
beginning.
they keep on saying 3 years have passed.
Been what, 2 years now? Um, but yeah, so anyway, if we wanna just do sort of like a breakdown of the episode right now, you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I kind of want to try to take it um, bit by bit. So, and we covered some of it already, but Viserys drunk on the hunt.
Yeah, there's a lot to
When
unpack here.
I love his drunken scene on the, I don't know, not throne, chair in the tent, where all of these people are coming towards him and trying to play politics with him, like just incessantly trying to like get his ear and steer him in one direction or another. And you could just watch him getting eaten away. I think he literally says like, "I'm being suffocated by all this fucking politicking."
Yes, this is, actually we'll get to this, in a few minutes, but one of the things that I thought was symbolic in this episode, or one of the strongest pieces of symbolism, is Viserys being drunk, because I feel like it's more representative of the state of the realm, at least at the central point of the royalty, where there's a very disconcerting situation, regarding succession, um, especially the succession of a king who by all accounts and everything we've seen so far, is very weak and indecisive.
That's so interesting because hadn't considered Viserys being drunk as a point of symbolism, but you're absolutely right. Like he is literally drunk with power. They're at the peak of their reign. The Targaryens are at the peak of their reign. You're watching all this prosperity going on around them, all this decadence, and all of these people around you. Like, what do you do as a drunk person, or what do the people around you do? The people around you try to steer you in different directions. You know,
And
so
he
that's what's
almost
going on right now. Is he's got his sober friends all around him trying to steer him to make these decisions, and he's increasingly straining and becoming frustrated with everything
yes.
attempting because he's aware of it and he hates it.
And it's funny because he is just as frustrated as those around him, where he wants Rhaenyra to marry, and that's a very high priority of his. But he doesn't want anybody else telling him what he should do about it because he has so many people who are obviously, he knows that they have interest in getting more power by marrying Rhaenyra. He's not stupid. So to him, it's just like, let's get this over with, but I also don't want to hear about it anymore. Um, and I appreciate, it makes him interesting to care less about the politics of everything and care more about, does Rhaenyra marry somebody who makes her happy? But at least then they know that she'll have strength in the as queen, because obviously everybody thinks that she'll need a man there to guide her. Even though she probably doesn't think that. I don't think she does need a man to guide her. She seems very accomplished.
Viserys chooses Alicent partially, yes. Like he has this conversation with Rhaenyra later in the episode. He definitely chooses Alicent partially just because that's what pleased him, right? He didn't want to choose the 12, 13-year-old girl or
Yeah.
however old she was. So like partially, yes, he chose Alicent because he just wanted to choose Alicent. But also part of that, I believe, was knowing that he was being steered in a direction if he did choose the Valerian girl. He has this resistance, even if it's the right thing for the realm and the right thing for the kingdom, because somebody told him to do it, he doesn't want to do it. It's like he has a stubbornness to him
Right.
where he knows that he can be perceived as weak if he listens to his counsel too much. So
It's
he'll go
like
out of his way to not listen to his counsel.
right. It's like when you have roommates and you know that the dishes need to get done and you plan on doing the dishes, and then one of your roommates tells you, "Hey, do the dishes." And then you're like, "I don't want to do it anymore because
Yep.
roommate's telling me that I have to do it." Uh it's almost like that. It's not a one-to-one comparison. Um but yeah, it's very apparent that King Viserys has some complexities about him in his relationship to the throne. I don't know if it's like regret. We haven't seen enough of his earlier days as king to know that,
Well, he
but
has guilt. He knows that no matter what he does, he can't seem to please Rhaenyra.
right.
He's forced to play these politics. Still coming up. By the way, he's still coming off as weak. Like he uses the Lannister spear to kill the
Incredibly weak.
stag, which I think is another point of symbolism. That's
Yes.
really interesting.
So moving on to symbolism a little bit, or at least a little bit further in the episode, uh, Rhaenyra has a sort of side plot where she kind of goes off on her own, leaves the campsite. Well, and obviously, it's Sir Kristen Cole's job to uh, guard her. He can't leave her unattended.
I really like Sir Kristen, by the way, but
So do
continue.
I like him quite a bit. But this is the part of the episode that I didn't really dig, just because I didn't feel that they were in any danger for most of it. When they went off to go into the woods. And I felt as if when they cut back, there's a lot of cuts in this episode, which is one thing I had a problem with. But when they cut back to Viserys and everybody at camp, and there's a lot of deliberating between Viserys and people who want to take Rhaenyra's hand in marriage. And I just felt like we just left off Rhaenyra and Kristen Cole in the woods, and I felt like they should have added some sort of threat in the woods to keep me on my toes a little bit, just because that would have made for a more engaging experience while I'm watching another plot go down as they're in the woods. Um, and to me, that just creates a tension that grips me a little bit more.
Do you mean
And,
like adding an assassin to the plot or adding maybe showing a boar brutalizing somebody earlier in the episode?
yes, exactly like that.
Uh,
But alas, we do see a boar. And
yeah.
I don't know if you believe this too, but I think that was probably the strongest point of symbolism in the episode.
I don't think that it was the strongest point of symbolism in the
Or
episode, but go
do,
ham. Tell
do you
me
think
why
it is a point of symbolism?
of course, yeah, of course it's a point of symbolism, but tell me why
So,
you think it's the best.
so Rhaenyra, we know so far, has probably she's the main character, right?
Right.
And we've seen from her to have a little bit more intuition than the king, to show strength and to make decisions. And, we as the audience, probably more than the realm itself, see her as the most proper um heir to the throne, right?
Right.
And so I was like, a boar, that's kind of an interesting. So I looked up what boars symbolize in media, because to me it was like a boar sort of symbolizes a sturdiness, a strength. The way that Rhaenyra killed the boar and finished it off was very, extreme. And so let me read you. This is the first thing that comes when you Google what boars symbolize. They represent bravery, command, control, and fighting spirit, which is super interesting to me because it's almost as if Rhaenyra is like the opposite of her father in terms of how they would govern. Um, Maybe not so extreme as Damon, but probably as much or more brave and willing to fight.
So to juxtapose this, we've got another animal in the episode, which is a stag.
Yes,
And a stag symbolizes grace, spiritual enlightenment, maturity, stamina, and I so like let's just talk about for a second, and we're gonna get back to Rhaenyra and the boar in the woods, but in order to paint the picture, I have to paint the picture of the stag in the woods. There's a there are 2 stags in the episode.
right,
There's the brown stag, or the regular stag, and there's the white heart stag.
right.
And the white heart stag is described to be the king of the Kingswood, a regal portrait for Prince Aegon's name day. So, okay, first of all, like, this entire hunt is incredibly depressing. Um, like, when the king rolls up, his men had already captured the stag. It's just a really sad display. Like, the guy says, and I didn't catch this the first time I watched the episode. I thought that they were lying to the king, telling him that that was the white stag, but they tell him, "It may not be a white, your grace, but he's a big lad." So, like, you've got this expectations versus reality thing going on where the king is disappointed by what he was seeking versus what he got, like his intention to get a white stag versus what his will produces for him. Because he's gliding through all of this. He's not doing any work. His men are
Yes,
doing everything for him, right down to pointing at where to stab the
yes.
stag.
It's almost pathetic that
Right, he doesn't
he,
get it right the first time. Like, he has
they
to get
like.
told to strike again.
Yes. They, like, slowly clap for him, it's not enthusiastic. It's almost embarrassing, that he's the king and he can't do something like perform a traditional hunt. He
He's
has to
like
have his men do it.
a flaccid king with good intentions, like, it's such a depressing display overall from, like, the circumstances to the performance to, like, the clap, like you mentioned. Like, and to go back to this, like, it really is what his will produces for him because we know that the white is in the woods. So if he were to give any effort towards this endeavor at all, I'm sure that he really would be able to get the white if he wanted it, but it doesn't seem like he really wants it.
So for me, what the way I interpreted this, and this goes hand in hand with my point about the boar, is that with the stag that he kills, for me, I didn't even look up what it meant because to me, it symbolized vulnerability, which is sort of why I made that point about Rhaenyra kind of embodying the same traits as the boar in strength and leadership or whatever, because Viserys embodies the traits of the stag in his vulnerability. It's not he's almost like the prey here. I mean, that's just basically because of how weak we perceive him right now, just based on his actions in the last 3 episodes. But it is pretty much true that he doesn't have convictions. He's not one to make decisive decisions for the good of the kingdom. Factoring his political standing in for so much of what he does and acts to do is really strange for a king. It's not a democracy. This is a kingdom. He's the king. He can do whatever he wants. And so it's the show seems to be screaming at us that this guy is not fit for this role.
Well, he is the stag in this scenario.
Yes.
He is the powerful beast. The King's Wood is his kingdom, and here he is in a clearing, roped down, being pulled in 5 different directions by different factions, to the point where he's stuck and vulnerable to be pierced by the Lannister spear.
Yeah, that's correct. Um
Which is symbolic that he wasn't even killed by, like, he didn't even kill the stag with his own weapon. He killed it with one of his men's weapons that was clearly a gift to him to win favor. So it's like just slapping us in the face with that. So yeah, it's interesting that that both Rhaenyra and Viserys kill an animal in this episode.
yes, and in very different contexts, in different ways, very different animals. Like for example, do you think that Viserys could have killed that boar?
Absolutely not. Viserys would have just laid
Yeah, he would have just been like he
flat.
would he would have been like, "Kristen Cole, please save me."
Well, I think it's interesting that Kristen Cole stabs the boar first, but it's Rhaenyra that finishes the job, and that's very intentional.
Yes.
You know, it's not just that he stabs the boar, it dies, and then she gets angry and stabs it a bunch. No, he stabs the boar, it falls, and then it keeps kicking, and
It
she finishes
reanimates
it
for a
off.
second.
Right.
Let me ask you, did you sense some chemistry between Rhaenyra and Kristen Cole?
Yes and no. It's
So I kind of have a similar answer. It,
Go
it
ahead.
seemed like the context of the situation was setting up some sort of chemistry between them, even though I didn't really feel it myself, mostly because I don't think either character made that kind of move. I would assume it would be very bad for Kristen Cole's image to say anything like that to Rhaenyra, but um, Rhaenyra is talking to him about suitors, and she says something kind of tone deaf about I kind of wish I got to live a normal life as opposed to being royalty. And obviously, he's like, a lot of people would trade places with you in a heartbeat. Um, but then, like, her asking him about if he would have married at one point was to me almost like nudging them in that direction of sort of having some chemistry.
Yeah, I think that's right in that I think both of these characters are smart characters. They're not
Yes.
dumb. Like, they both know their own standing, they know their place, they know just all of the circumstances that are surrounding what a relationship would be. So I think that they're both smart enough not to make a move. But I think that there is chemistry there. They just both know that at this point in time, it can't happen.
Yes, I agree. But
But and that kind of goes into Ray's statement at the start of the episode in the carriage. She says, "No one's here for me," which is laughably wrong. Like, all of those suitors are there for her. specific
Yeah.
like
This is a
case.
big opportunity for people who don't normally interact with King Viserys to give him their pitch on what he should be doing better as the king,
Right.
which I think is pretty clear he's not very much into. Um, I think it's pretty funny that everybody has this political justification for Viserys, in terms of who they think that Rhaenyra should marry, and he's just not having any of it, even though like he he understands how right they are. It's like he's constantly getting advice and choosing to ignore it and asking for it anyway.
So I wanna go back really quick because you're touching on a, we're kinda touching on Viserys drunk on the hunt scene on his chair again. Like, so and this kinda ties back to sending riders out to find Rhaenyra, so it's still tied to there is an interest within the camp to protect Rhaenyra because they know that she is a political game to be played. So, like, I don't know if I said this already or not, but, like, when is the King of Law the Lannister guy? Or is that the Stone his last name's Stone or something?
Some of the lore is still up in the air to me. I'm not really 100% sure on a lot of it, to be honest.
So it's after Viserys already explodes on Hightower about not wanting to get suffocated by all the politicking, and Hightower Otto is just kinda like, "We'll speak of it no longer."
Right.
He kinda stands up, and literally, like, 5 minutes later, his King of Law comes up to him, and he's like, "We sent out riders to find Rhaenyra," and then he's like, "By the way, here's my input on the political
Yeah.
odds," and then, like, including a tug to join the fight in the Stepstones, and I swear to you, I thought Viserys was going to kill him. I
Yeah.
thought
He looked
he, like,
mad.
stood up from his chair, like, walked over to him, I'm like, "Oh, you're gonna fucking die right here." But Daemon would've killed him.
Yes. I'm glad you mentioned that because I think it's time to talk about Damon and the other side of this episode, which is the war.
Yeah,
So basically, they're still fighting with Crab Feeder, and what is that area again? Who are the
Stepstones.
actors there? Right, and it just is an absolutely miserable war. It seems. I mean, right down to the weather. I
Yeah.
mean, everyone looks like cold and damp and miserable, and everybody is, getting on each other's nerves. Um, I guess that's Corliss's son, the man who was there.
I think
Who
his son and his brother are both there.
Yes, and Corliss warns, I think his son of mutiny, when he says, why should we, keep fighting
No,
for Damon?
I think that's his brother. I could be wrong.
Okay, okay, fair enough. But that was a really, I mean, there's a guard or a messenger that comes to inform Damon later on of the fact that King Viserys has decided to send more troops to assist them in ending the fight, and it's I mean, talk about don't shoot the messenger. I mean, a lot of people are comparing Damon's reaction to Kylo Ren, and I think that's a very good comparison because he just flips out and takes it all out on this messenger, because he doesn't like the fact that he has to have his brother, or at least his brother doesn't believe in him, and he is sending troops in to help him. Uh,
I think that's a great comparison. I think Kylo Ren and Daemon are cut of the same cloth
yes,
in their, um, I in their position as a leader
and their
because
character archetypes.
in their character archetypes exactly, like, they are so I don't know, what word is that? They're so, um,
Ambitious, ambitious and cruel. Because
arrogant.
yes, ambitious, cruel, arrogant. Although all three of those words fit like a glove for both Damon and Kylo Ren. Um, Probably because Damon has just he's so convinced that he's right and he would know how to do things if he were king. And so it seems like anyone who's not already heir, or even to some extent people who are heir, like Rhaenyra, are making so many moves to try to show the kingdom that or the realm. I don't know if it would be a kingdom. Would it be?
The kingdom, yeah.
To show, yeah, sure. To show the kingdom that they can rule.
Well,
Uh,
so here's a word that I was looking for: entitled and privileged.
yeah,
So,
definitely.
so like they haven't earned their stead; they just had their stead to begin with, and the men have to respect that. They didn't earn any of this though, and the men, as a result, are losing favor. Like I kind of want to bring it back a little bit to bring it into focus. So Corlys convinces Daemon to fight what turns out to be a failing war effort. And I love that opening shot of Daemon riding in on his dragon and landing on his
Yeah.
infantrymen, because I feel like that is just so symbolic of Daemon as a character
Yes.
coming in, thinking that he's the hero, right? Combined with disappointing and at the end of the day, like killing his own men.
He's so focused on killing the enemy that he doesn't care about the collateral damage or all the sacrifices he makes from what he's trying to protect, which is the people that he's, riding with.
And
Um,
that leads to the people that he's riding with not trusting him and knowing that he has no regard for them. So why would they have any regard for him?
exactly. But to some people, it might be viewed as a point of strength because he's willing to do what needs to be done to succeed. Um, Despite the fact that he doesn't succeed and he needs Viserys' troops to come in to eventually help him.
And I think that that's an interesting angle because there's a perception that the crown is already at war because there's a Targaryen leading the war effort. It's like early in the episode, the ladies in the tent are talking about
Lady
this is your
Redwine.
brother's war.
Yes. Um, and Rhaenyra is almost embarrassed by that, or she's very frustrated by the fact that she's like almost being preemptively blamed for things that her father has done as king, or at least she doesn't like to hear about her father's failures, or perceived failures from other higher ups in the realm, which is interesting, um, because I'm sure she has criticisms of the way he's ruling herself. But this is a king who's, we've talked about how weak he is, and it's like in so much fiction, you see people who are so afraid to speak ill of a king, but it feels like so many people in this show are willing to just like almost bitch slap him in terms of how they treat him. It's like he doesn't understand the position that he holds, or at least people aren't afraid of the consequences. Like that would Corliss like talked back to him and walked out on him in the one meeting in the last episode. That's a very, you know, ballsy thing to do against the king of the place where you live. And it's the same there with Lady Redwine. It's like you're telling the princess about, what you think of her father's weaknesses, who's the king.
Right. And it's like there's no negative implication there. Like it's
Yeah.
almost like there's no consequence whatsoever. Um so Damon is pissed that his brother is coming to the rescue, and that sets him off to go on a suicide mission. This is the first time the suicide mission is really the first time that the show's writing has majorly faltered for me. But I'm curious what you think as somebody who hasn't seen Game of Thrones.
So I really thought that was like, I think Damon might die here. It'd be really bizarre if he did, but it was hard for me to picture him making it out of that situation. But I don't know if the writing was faltering for me here, but I feel like I didn't see a lot of the build up to that moment. Um, it felt more like it was. I don't want. It sounds so generic to say it was thrown in there, but I really did feel that way because it's towards the end of the episode, and Damon is obviously very arrogant, and he wants to. I mean, he's emotional. He's an emotional person, and so for one, I think it's a very well shot scene. I think some people might say that there's too many like cuts or whatever, but for me, I felt like doing a great job at embodying just the absolute chaos of that moment. And so he kills a dozen people um, before the dragon comes in, and he ends up being saved. He gets hit with two arrows that he's able to dislodge one of them. I think one of them remains in. Um, and then he sees like the whole army coming in, uh, ready to pillage everything in their way, including him once they find him. And he starts to unsheath his blade. And it's like in seeing the movie where you're like, okay, you know that they stand no chance, but they're going to try to fight anyway. And that's when the dragon comes in. And wow, dragons are a very good weapon to have if you're in this situation because you can fly. You can one breath of a dragon can kill dozens of people. This is when I think the directing was really good, because the overhead shots and the bird's eye view shots of the dragons, um, it was just above above par to me for what I expect in a TV show. Um, it just looked very cinematic, and so I really appreciated that. What did you think?
I would agree that from a directorial and just visual perspective, this was executed very well. Like, it was just overall probably one of the best executions that you could have given the circumstance. I think that from a plot perspective, um, it's kind of like the Marvel formula of your hero is down on his luck and everybody's losing and getting beaten up, and ergo, like, because of that, the hero will be victorious and somehow figure out how to overcome these insurmountable odds.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I've been conditioned based on recent storytelling to know that, okay, because the odds are so out of favor, he has to come up on top, and I didn't like that. I wanted him to die at that point because he didn't deserve to live after
Yeah.
that, you
So
know?
for me, I feel similarly. I mean, that's a really good point actually, because it's a very coincidental scenario that they created for the show, where right
Rhaenyra, isn't that
after
Kristen on the other dragon?
possibly I don't think I was paying attention close enough to realize that if it was, unfortunately. But what I will say is that like you have part one, uh, Damon goes on a semi-suicide mission, kills like a bunch of those soldiers, um, in a rage. Part two, Damon gets hit with two arrows. He's knocked down. Part three, a whole ocean of soldiers come running in, uh, to limit his time to escape. He's obviously about to face his death. And then finally, the other army comes in, and it feels like all happens within like a minute. And so I can see exactly what you mean by that in terms of the writing.
So, like, yeah, I
You
it
know
just
what I would
didn't
have
feel.
liked?
Go ahead.
I could have taken a whole episode of Damon like stabbed with two arrows, like running into like a trench and like getting lost and having to find his way out and avoiding soldiers that want to kill him, and like just like a survival episode just about Damon.
Yeah, because it
Uh,
feels too much like action hero-y in
right.
in this episode, and by the way, like, there's a disappointing element that the entire war in the Stepstones lasted about 5 minutes like, the crab feeder setup was a complete bust.
Do you remember the Better Call Saul episode titled Rock and Hard Place?
You're gonna have to remind me what happens in it because I don't.
It's the episode where Nacho is running from the
Yeah,
Salamancas,
yeah,
and the other half, the Gus's half of the Juarez cartel as well,
right.
who also want him dead. And he spends like the entire episode by himself doing all sorts of stuff to survive. There's one point where he hops onto the top of a truck, um, and climbs inside, and then he doesn't trust that he is secure enough, and he believes that they know that he'll be hiding in there. So at one end of the truck, there's like a pool of oil, and he like walks into the oil and like uh
Submerges himself.
submerges himself so that they don't see him. I would have loved to see like a whole 15 to 20 minutes of Damon doing stuff like that
Yeah.
instead of what we got, which is, a bit, you're right, a very action hero type plot device.
Well,
But
choosing to show us about this failed war as opposed to telling us that this war has failed.
yes, but yeah, like I said, I would have loved to like a 15, 20 minutes of Damon just like running through the woods, like evading soldiers, maybe hiding under a tree. I don't know. It's some as stuff, just doing stuff to, raise attention a little bit, make us worry about Damon for more than like 30 seconds.
So what are the implications of this wrap up of the Stepstones with Damon for him as a character? Do you see that how do you see this in terms of how the public views the Targaryens, what this means for the relationship between Daemon and Corlys? Because, Daemon was convinced by Corlys to start this failing war effort in the first place, so they could have a poor relationship, or it could be a positive one because Corlys could be happy that, this crab feeder is no longer a pester in his side.
It really is hard for me to say. It depends heavily on how the realm perceives it because, on one hand, Damon has been leading most of this war effort, and in the end, it succeeded. On the other hand, it only succeeded because Viserys was willing to send dragons and more men to go help them. So, do they credit Daemon for this success, or do they credit Viserys? Judging by Daemon's reaction to the letter received by him from the messenger that said that notified him about the new troops that are coming in to help, it seems like it'll be a dock against him because he'll be viewed as having failed and Sarah's having to bail him out. On
Right.
the other hand, maybe, this show will surprise us and Viserys will be, maybe he'll be too weak to take credit and he'll, credit Damon anyway
Well, it
because,
was Daemon's pride that motivated him to start that mission so hastily because he didn't
yeah,
want he didn't he's like, "Okay, now that the reinforcements are on the way, I need to do this by myself now because if I don't do it now by myself, then I will have to have been saved by these new forces," which is it ends up that's what exactly what happens.
yes. And my favorite part about this episode as a whole is that it deepens the way I care about the characters. Because after episode one, I really didn't, have to I wasn't too attached to many of the characters, but by this episode, I'm now pretty, you know, I'm more. They stick with me more. I care about Damon's arc now. I want to see how he develops. If he, I want to truly understand how bad he is because they've shown, he has a dark side, but he also has empathy and he has, he's smart. He's very clever. Um, I'm interested in Viserys because despite being very weak, compromising morals oftentimes, he also loves Rhaenyra, and he's the one person who is willing to give Rhaenyra the benefit of the doubt because, it's a given that virtually nobody else respects her status as the heir, but he does. And that goes for all the characters. All the characters have something like that going on where I'm now caring about, how they proceed.
I like the characters of this show in the same way that I like the characters of Better Call Saul, Take a Drink, um, because everybody is smart. Everybody's making decisions that are intelligent.
Yes.
From Otto Hightower maneuvering to try to get Rhaenyra to wed Aegon as a way of compromise, which it's a compromise that Viserys doesn't even know is occurring because he doesn't really know Hightower's perspective on this.
Right.
But compromise nonetheless. But from that to Viserys having a self-awareness of his weakness to Rhaenyra, like yes, Rhaenyra is still immature in many ways, like, she's pouty at the start of the episode, and she still has some growth to, grow into, but she's still making really intelligent decisions for her own interests. So I'm a big fan of all that. What I also enjoy is that the show is setting our characters up to make mistakes too.
Yes.
Um, I like the position that Viserys puts himself in, naming Rhaenyra the heir, now having a male son, which is going to set up a conflict which we know he's not going to act on, but he's also self-aware of that conflict. He speaks to Rhaenyra at the end of the episode and says, "You must marry," and this is the like the highlight point. He says, "Strengthen your own claim, shore up your succession, multiply."
Yeah.
So, like, Viserys is aware that his decisions are going to lead to people questioning Rhaenyra's claim. So he's urging her because he loves her. He's urging her to strengthen her claim and to
Well,
shore up her succession. He wouldn't be doing that if he didn't already know that he's causing problems with her for her with his decisions.
because he knows that if he were to die today, that there's a decent chance that when Rhaenyra goes to take the crown, she will have unprecedented challenges to that because people might say, "Well, hold on, why should she get the crown? She doesn't even have an heir of her own, and she's young. Like, is she not going to, you know, have kid like are we still gonna bounce around between brothers and cousins and everything? Like, why not get somebody who has a son already, who we don't have to worry about who will be the heir for a while because it'll be a parent."
Yeah, and I love that he like, in his love for her, he's allowing her to choose her own match, and that surprises her because it makes her realize that he really does care, which, as an audience member, we're shown over and over again Viserys making decisions that shows that he cares about Rhaenyra, but pay attention from Rhaenyra's perspective. It's been 3 years since Viserys has made a good decision.
Yeah. Right.
So, like, it's taken him 3 years to come to this point. So, like, be that as it may, he says to her at the end of the episode, "Rhaenyra, I wavered at one point, but I swear to you on your mother's memory that you will not be supplanted." That is a promise that he cannot keep. Like,
Yeah.
though he may not supplant her, like, the wording of that, "I swear to you on your mother's memory that you will not be supplanted." He's not necessarily promising that he won't supplant her. He's saying that she won't be supplanted at all. Absolutely not a promise that he can keep.
Right. Because I mean, obviously we know that this is a prequel to Game of Thrones. This is there's going to be a lot of people vying for power, and rightfully so. I mean, it's an important position, and Rhaenyra being the heir is unprecedented as is. Um, so overall, the problem I have with this episode is just kind of a problem with this series so far. Obviously, the time jumps. We know we've talked about this. We might be alone in this, by the way, because I haven't seen a lot of discourse on this. The time jumps are still a little bit jarring for me, just because of like it's just hard for me to like. I just feel like I have to keep reminding myself. I'm like, it's been years since this last episode, and it
Yeah.
feels like some of the characters haven't really developed that much. And I just know, like, personally, I'm like, people change so much over the span of 3 years, especially you know
In the age group that they're in.
15 to 18. That's a huge difference. Um, but I don't know. I just feel like a lot of this. It sounds generic, but I feel like a lot of it's been set up, or that the puzzle pieces or the dominoes haven't started to fall yet. The story hasn't um, planted its feet quite yet, or at least I don't know what the implications of people's actions are. Um, I mean, it'll be interesting to find out for sure, but like the sort of crab feeder subplot in the background, it didn't
Mhm.
feel extremely consequential
Right.
apart from how will it change how certain people are viewed or how certain people feel, not necessarily as the state of things. There was a moment briefly where we thought, could Damon die? But I think all of us certainly knew that they're not going to cast Matt Smith for 3 episodes that kill it with little character development. Um, but that's pretty much all. That's the biggest problem I had so far, which is why I felt sort of this episode was dragging me along because I did watch the preview for this episode. I did watch it, and it felt more bombastic in that preview than it ended up being.
I am in. I don't know if this is going to come off as callous, but I struggle to care about some of these subplots. Like, I honestly, the meat and potatoes of the episode for me was the hunt sequence. I really enjoyed watching Viserys getting pulled in different directions. I really enjoyed the plot between Rhaenyra and Sir Criston. Um, I really enjoyed watching Hightowers operating, and Alicent and all of that was great. I really just could not find myself to care about the war in the Stepstones because I just didn't feel the relevancy, and it just was pain. It was just a pain. It was just slow. It was dragging for me.
Yeah, I felt that way too. I felt like the pace of the episode, just like the pure writing, picked up after the first half. But like I said before, I feel like they could have added just adding, stakes here and there for somebody will make the tension rise among all subplots because you feel like characters are wasting time by not acting.
Right.
Um, so like if they had shown Rhaenyra and Sir Chris Nicole in physical danger while they were out in the woods, it might have I might have still felt that tension, even just watching Viserys strunk back at the camp listening to people's bullshit. Because it's like, dude, what are you doing? Your daughter's in danger. But she wasn't, so I didn't feel that way, which is fine. It doesn't have to be that, but uh, I don't know. I'm not a professional writer, but for me, I was like, um, as someone who's frustrated with the pacing a little bit and would have preferred a more engaging, you know, subplot. To me, it feels a little bit too focused on setting up character relationships to happen in the future.
So this is another problem with the time jumps, which is why this? Why is this the story that you're choosing to tell? If you're gonna skip 6 months later, 3 years later, a year after that, what cross section is occurring at this particular point in time that is relevant to tell? And for me, I don't understand yet why we took time in the Stepstones to tell that story, to dedicate 20 minutes, half an hour of the episode on that when they could have focused it on something else that might have been more interesting. So I'm just we'll just have to kind of wait and see kind of a thing.
But yeah, I mean, that pretty much rounds out all like the pacing problems I have with the show. I feel like I'm being too hard on it almost, but I really did enjoy this episode just because of how much um, how ingrained the drama is between each of the characters. Everyone's intentions feel so clear now, um, and this is when they can really start playing with the puzzle pieces a little bit.
I'm
And
excited for the show to start spreading its wings,
yeah,
right?
I want character decisions to be more complex. I want things not to be so clear um, from here on out
I want there to be broad sweeping changes now
to the status quo.
to the status quo. I think like the next episode I think will be a fulcrum in we need a a chess piece to fall to watch
Yes,
this cascade.
I think it's a very good way of putting it because I think that, you know, and I don't know anything, but I could be completely wrong. This could not happen for 3 seasons from now. I think that the king has like 1 or 2 episodes left to live.
I would second that. I mean, I hope so. I seriously hope that he doesn't last too much longer. Not that he's a bad character. I love him as a character, but he needs to go in order for this to really kick off.
I agree.
All right. Well, I think that should do it. Unless you have any other points that you want to cover.
No, I think I've pretty much covered everything.
All right. Well, we'll catch you on the next episode of House of the Dragon.
Indeed. It's been a pleasure.
I'm Groby.
And I'm Kriv.